All right, a lot to get into tonight here. We've got a good panel for it. Let's introduce you to him. Jim Kasuris. Jimmy's criminal defense attorney in Manhattan, sitting on the board of directors of the New York City Criminal Bar Association, frequently lecturing at New York Law School and the bar associations in Queens, New York City, and Birmingham, England. But he is on the right side of the pond tonight. Mayo Bartlett, an attorney at law offices of Mayo Bartlett PLLC. He's also the former chief of the Bias Crimes Unit at the Westchester County DA's office. And we're also joined, usually in the political arena, but an attorney in her own right, Shelley Mayer. Shelley's a Democratic Assemblywoman representing the great city of Yonkers. And as I said, also a fellow counsel with the table. Guys, all thank you very much. A lot of interesting I think feedback from the outgoing judge, especially because, yes, retiring with grace here, but not entirely of his own volition. And he said, Shelley, that, hey, 70 is a magic number. Maybe it made sense in the 1880s. It doesn't make sense in 2015. You look at the U.S. Supreme Court, we don't have that kind of a number. And as I said to him, you don't seem like you lost a lot on your fastball. He said, no, you're a better judge at 70 than when you first put on the robe. It doesn't make a lot of sense.
No, I agree. I think it's very arbitrary. It's outdated, as we were saying earlier. There's attorneys that we know in their 40s and 50s who are sort of losing it, and then there are people in their 70s, like Judge Lippman, who would have done a very fine job for a number of years and would have probably been a good judge of when he should step down, rather than having an arbitrary number placed upon him. But he handled it with grace and dignity, and that's the kind of person he is. Credit to him. He's made a huge difference, I think, in the justice system, and I think it's really a tribute to him how beautifully he handled it.
I'd be remiss me if I didn't ask you, the person replacing him, Janet DeFiore, Westchester DA's office, an office that you were at from a predecessor, but nonetheless, you think she'll do a good job?
She certainly has the tools to do a good job. I think that ideally, if you approach the judge position. The judicial position is very different from the district attorney's position. On the district attorney's level, you have much more political consideration, and as the chief judge of the state of New York, you should have none. So you ought to be able to look at cases and also to do what Judge Lippman did, not be afraid to interpret cases, but also to play the role that the judiciary plays. And my favorite judges always say they're not potted plants. Okay, so they're not just there for us to give our side and not for them to use their minds and to also have some influence in the case.
You know, Jimmy, one of the things I got from him was, in terms of as a judge right now, do you think that they have too much discretion or too little discretion? You know the answer you're going to get from a judge, that they want to have more discretion. But as somebody who's going, bringing a client there, sometimes you feel that they go outside the four corners, as it says. Are you comfortable, or would you prefer a judge who can exercise his or her discretion a little bit more than maybe some do?
Well, in the federal system, the discretion of federal judges was returned in 2005 when the guidelines were rendered advisory as opposed to mandatory. And I think it is one of the most, the fairest developments that has happened in federal jurisprudence, because these judges exercise their discretion well, and they're no longer handcuffed by the guidelines. But that also dovetails into, the question of the retirement age. There was a panel of Judge Wexler, Judge Glasser, Judge Pratt, and Judge Weinstein, all in their 90s, federal judges. And I have to tell you, the amount of wisdom and ability to look at cases and look at defendants that comes with that many years when you still have it is mind-boggling. These are amazing judges. I love appearing before them. The level of wisdom that they have, the level of knowledge that they have, what they have seen pass them by in the law and in humanity over so many years is what you need to be a judge.
He did say, though, that what frustrated him as a jurist was, with some of the guidelines, the sentencing guidelines kind of hamstrung the judge to a degree, and also then the parole board basically decides how long your client, in effect, goes away for. Is that a reality?
It absolutely is a reality, but the problem is those guidelines not only hamstrung the judges, but they gave enormous power to prosecutors, because prosecutors had these guidelines in hand. They were able to over-indict and then control the negotiations, and in controlling the negotiations, they also control the sentence. And then you have the other hurdle of of parole. But I have to say, the parole system and the supervised release system and the early release programs, I think at the insistence of people like Judge Lippman, they're starting to recognize that people don't need to stay in jail forever.
A couple more things relating to the judge aspect of this. He clearly relished the role that, as chief judge, he isn't supposed to just sit on the sidelines. And whether it was bail reform, we'll talk about a little bit, making more services available for those who couldn't afford it, leveling the playing field as much as it could be, at least under the current constraints. He says a lot of other states, they gave me a hard time when I said that. And in fact, one of your colleagues, at least on the Senate side, Senator Bonasek, said, in effect, this guy's too activist. There's no difference between the legislature where you guys sit and the judiciary, and Lippman, to his eyes, sometimes crossed the line too much. What do you think?
Oh, I absolutely think he was the right kind of activist judge. When you sit in an office like mine and you get complaints from ordinary people who have issues about access to justice, the legislature is a cumbersome place to make change. He controlled the courts and took steps to ensure there was greater access. He listened to complaints from constituents, from lay people going to the courts, from attorneys. He made dramatic changes in so many aspects of our justice system, and I thought it was highly appropriate.
Well, let's say you and I happen to probably agree with almost all of some of the changes that he tried to put in place. I think the table would. But let's say it went the other way.
Yes.
Let's say it was of a completely different, not just political persuasion, but that he was saying too many rights here for people on the bottom end here. We're going to change that. For example, he tried to put in place some of the pro bono, mandatory for attorneys. Let's say it went the other way. Would you still feel the same way? It's the role of the chief judge to be, in effect, not just thinking about the robe and the case in front of him, but about justice on a broader level?
Well, I think the role is to administer the court system, which includes making decisions about how to make the system more just. I may disagree with another chief judge, and we all may, but I think to say that you should sit in a little corner and just read cases, that's not. And let me just say about Janet DiFiore, who I know very well, I think she'll be an extraordinarily good chief judge, and will also have an activist view of her role as chief judge.
Will she pass easy, or is she going to have a hard time in the Senate?
She'll pass.
Okay. All right. Mayo, one of the things he was proudest of, and he even admitted, he didn't fix it, he started it at least, was bail reform. And I knew we've spoken quite a bit about this on the program. I mentioned a couple cases, in fact, that I know you know very intimately well. It's better, but just how broken is it still? And I think the public doesn't realize that if you don't have $300 to $500 in your pocket, not even for a felony, you could be sitting in Rikers for not a week, not a month, but a year and even more.
Well, it's responsible and constitutionally responsible and fiscally responsible. And I also had the pleasure of working with Judge Lippman in terms of raising the age, so making sure that we didn't incarcerate children and treat them as adults. And we're one of the last two states that do that, us and North Carolina in the union. But he really had a true vision, and when you really stop and think about what he's talking about us spending sometimes over $100,000 for someone who maybe stole something that was worth $2 because they didn't have the money to pay bail.
Sitting in prison.
Sitting in prison. And talking about what the point of bail is. And we always parrot these terms, that these concepts that you're innocent until proven guilty. Well, if that's the case, then why are you in jail? And so if you are denied freedom, number one, it prevents you from having the same ability to defend yourself that the prosecution has to bring prosecution. It also puts you at an inherent disadvantage. They know that individuals who are incarcerated are greatly more likely to take advantage of the plea bargaining system, irrespective of whether they're innocent or guilty.
You can't make a living either to help pay the fees that they're looking for on the back end.
And it's an intergenerational effect, again, because you're going to see that same impact upon their children and their children's children.
We're going to be talking more about the situation in Baltimore. He couldn't get into a few things because he's obviously not till the end of the year. But one of the things he said he was happy about was the judges were getting paid more. Now, it's always unpopular, and I know this. It's not just an Albany thing. It could be a Trenton thing. It could be a Hartford thing, wherever you're watching us. The idea to pay legislators more or jurists more. But we were losing a lot of good judges, weren't they, who said, I can't pay my kids' tuitions doing this. And they bumped them up now a decent amount, right? Sure. Mm-hmm. And it's not just, I think it goes into a two-stage effect. Am I right on that?
Yes,
There's 6 months and then another, and then a hit two.
A trigger,
But you guys know judges that have said, I'm going back in the private sector, not because I want to hang a shingle up, but I just can't make the nut.
That's right, and what they do is such a tremendous public service, and you know, most judges work very hard, very hard. You had judges who get in at 8:30, 9 in the morning, they're reading decisions, they're writing decisions, they work all day, they're on trial all the time. Well, there are judges that don't work as hard. But what they do is a tremendous public service. And in this day and age, when you've got a situation where, how long was it that they didn't get a raise? Years. You know, who can survive without getting a reasonable raise for 10 years? And you're absolutely right. You lose good people because you need smart people.
Although I'll tell you who can survive, everybody else who works for the government, because none of them get raises for 10 years. They get modicum of an increase that doesn't keep up with the cost of living. And when you look at all of this, and we've talked about it before with our young people that are coming out of college or maybe out of high school going into the trades, when you start to look at investing in our own people, our own infrastructure, I think we have to start getting to a point where we revisit our tax structure.
Going outside the four corners. I talk about the judge here. This
Mark's
mail
not here,
going
and
outside the
he
legal
told me to
stuff
get it
here
in today.
Yeah.
Mark's not here to yell at him.
I will only tell you. Exactly. He sees an opening, he takes it. It was a pleasure talking to the guy. I have a feeling that he will have a lot to say after the beginning of the new year, because he thinks that the field was so unlevel before. Most of us have no idea how much. Maybe the folks at the table do, but he thinks it started, but there's still a tremendous amount of work to do, and I know he won't be quiet on the subject, especially come January 1. All right, coming up next, a misdraw for the first cop in the Freddie Gray case in Baltimore, but 5 more officers still set to stand trial. The question is, how will this all play out? You're looking at live photos as demonstrators are assembling. To our knowledge yet, nothing violent at this point, but you can see a lot of uneasiness in Baltimore tonight.